What's up, you guys? This is Devin with CenturyFX Studios, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the EOS R5 and R6. But before we get into that and the leaked specs about this camera and any kind of camera talk, I actually want to say the names, and I want to share a moment of silence for those who died in that tragic helicopter crash. John Altobelli, championship basketball coach of Orange Coast College. We have his wife, Carrie Altobelli, his daughter, Alisa Altobelli. We also have Christina Mauser. We also have Sarah Chester, Peyton Chester, Ara Zobayan, and of course, Gianna Bryant and Kobe Bryant. So let's have a moment of silence for them. All right, so there's rumors. There's a rumor site, of course, everybody should know it. If you don't know it, it's called Canon Rumors, and they rank their rumors by a CR1, a CR2, CR3. CR1 being okay, but CR3 being really, really reputable, and this is pretty much going to happen. And all of these came out to be CR3 ranked rumors. And a lot of people think that Canon is just leaking their own rumored specs just to get everybody hyped. Canon always comes out with specs around the time of the Olympics and the time of a camera release, and it just seems too convenient. Now we have rumored specs of an EOS R5 and R6. Now note that Canon did mention that they were going to come out with some professional EOS R cameras to accompany the EOS R itself. The EOS R5 and the EOS R6 are two cameras that actually are supposed to leave the EOS R in the dust and really outperform it, and everybody is starting to get excited about Canon again. Let's start off with the specs from the EOS R6. They're touting a 20 megapixel body, 5 stops of IBUS, in-body image stabilization, 12 frames a second with the mechanical shutter, and 20 frames per second with electronic shutter, a bigger battery, and 4K 60. And now these specs seem all right, but let's move on to the specs from the R5. And we're going to use the specs from the R5 to really break down, because this is the big daddy. This is the one that really boasts a bigger set of features, and we really want to use these bigger sets of features to dictate whether or not Canon's going to actually come through with these rumored specs, because they really need to come and blow the water out with something. And if these rumors are anywhere near true, then we're definitely going to have a real Sony competitor, because Nikon is not in the game anymore. It's Canon and Sony today. It is a Canon-Sony rivalry this millennium. All right, so we have a 45 megapixel body, 5 stops of image stabilization, or IBUS, or in-body image stabilization, and then 7 to 8 stops of image stabilization with the IS of your lens. 12 frames a second with the mechanical shutter, and then you have a scroll wheel and a no-touch wheel. So I think they're talking about like a literal like tactile wheel that you can use to move your focus points. Live view toggle switch. So I'm thinking this is a feature from the EOS R where you can actually toggle and switch your autofocus points with the touch screen in live view, but I'm not quite sure exactly what that means. For those of you who use the EOS R, you probably know a little bit better than me. Bigger battery, of course, that's a given. 8K video, that's a very interesting little tidbit there. And then you have 4K at 120 frames a second, and then you have a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi connectivity for your camera. All right, now we're going to break down these specs one by one, and I'm going to try to get as deep as I possibly can. So yes, this is going to be a long video, and yes, we do have a table of contents if you don't want to stay for the long video. So if you didn't stay around to watch the whole thing, don't stay around to watch the whole thing, but don't complain in the comments that the video is long, because I'm telling you that now. I know I'm not sponsored by Canon, so these are the disclaimers, and I'm sticking to them. I'm not sponsored by any camera company that will want me to say positive things about this camera just to make this camera sell. The megapixels. because the EOS R5 is that camera that has the most. It offers it's touting to offer the most, and we got to break it down from there. So 45 megapixels. Can Canon do it on a mirrorless body? Yes, they can. And the reason I say that is because sensors have never been the issue with Canon. Canon has made the 5DSR a 50 megapixel full frame sensor, so 45 megapixels shouldn't be that hard for them. I don't see why not, and I don't see why we should stick around and talk about that specific topic. I think Canon can do it, and I don't think they're gonna have problems with it. 5 stops of IBUS, and then combined with IS, you get an extra 7 to 8 stops. Now, IS is offered by the lenses that Canon gives you. Now, Canon did have some kind of digital stabilization with the EOS R, but I think that was a kind of a cop-out because nobody wants anything to digitally happen, or nobody with a pro sense of mind or a raw video and picture sense of mind where you want to create everything and cultivate everything from the ground up would have the sense that they want the camera to do something extra digital to their picture. The fact that the camera makes JPEGs is a real hindrance to the people who know exactly everything about, and they're image quality nerds. They know everything about imagery and want to create everything from the ground up. It's like raw materials. But anytime the camera offers extra digital processing to anything, whether it be image stabilization, whether it be digital zoom, whether it be digital enhancement of JPEG quality attachments like saturation, all that stuff, pros know that that's no-go. You want to be able to really manifest the entire image the way you want to. Now, occasionally JPEG can make some good images, or they have these HEIF files now, I believe, that are new, smaller weighting JPEGs with better processing to them. They can probably do some decent stuff like a little bit of HDR here and there and shadow play and highlight play, but I think that raw images will overdo those. So, and most people are going to think the ability to be able to, really mess with your own raw files are the thing to go to. But when you have IBUS counteracts the actual movement before it actually becomes a picture. So you don't have any digital processing of an image trying to keep it still before you take the image, or after you take the image to crop it and then do all of the stuff that you don't want to this image to make it look slightly worse and maybe even have some artifacts here and there. So IBUS is going to be a big step up for Canon because they should have had it a long time ago. All right, so now we got 5 stops without IS on your lens. Now, usually Canon's IS really comes from their lenses because all their lenses that are high quality, pretty much everything that's a zoom lens that's high quality has IS on it, especially your 70 to 200s, your 300 millimeter primes, your 400, your 100 to 400, your 500s and your 600s, and anything in between as far as those big telephoto lenses that need IS just to function at a usable level. They all have IS, and now you're saying that you have image stabilization that can give you 7 to 8 stops of image stabilization once you put on that lens with IS. Now, if your lens doesn't have IS, you're just stuck with the 5 stops stabilization. But that is a lot. That is a lot to boast about. Now, I've known camera companies to try to combine their IS with their in-body sensor stabilization, which is what IBUS is. But you have to understand that 8 stops of extra image quality or shake-free images is a lot to boast about. So what I ended up doing, and I'm going to linger on this topic for a second or two, but what I ended up doing was actually calculating how many stops of image stabilization that you're able to get out of this supposed new camera sensor or IBUS from Canon. They're touting 8 stops or 7 to 8 stops of stability with your lens. I'm just going to go over pretty much everything I went through. So I imagine myself holding a camera lens at 1/60th of a second and trying to get off an image. Usually people can get away with hand holding an image around 1/60th of a second. And if I add 5 stops of image stabilization, Canon is telling me that I can hand hold a shot at 1/2 a second or 1/2 seconds. They're also telling me that if I were to have an IS lens and hand hold it at 1/60th of a second, I can then drop that shutter speed down to 2 seconds. And then I could probably also drop it down to another 4 seconds. That is what 8 stops is. Going from 1/60th of a second to 4 seconds. 8 stops of image quality or 8 stops of stability. I say image quality because I think of it in terms of the exposure triangle. If you're able to free up your settings in specific photographic situations where you're able to add more light to the situation by lowering your shutter speed, that means less noise. That means you can bring down your ISO from another 5 to 8 stops. That's what it's telling me, because I'm able to bring more light into my sensor by having it shoot longer. These are all handheld shutter speeds that we try to get away with to get the best image quality by holding our camera, bracing our arms, holding our camera up, and trying to get the stillest image. If we can get still images off at slower shutter speeds, then we're able to offer more image quality, more dynamic range, more color quality to whatever ISO that we're shooting at. So you might be saying, well, Devin, really, Devin, what does this mean? And you might be saying to yourself, Devin, what are you really saying? How does this affect me in my shooting? Well, anybody remember the shutter rule? A lot of people like to use the shutter rule as a rule of thumb. The shutter rule essentially states that you have to be shooting at 1 over your focal distance to get sharp images out of that lens. Now, for most lenses that are 60 millimeters and below, like 60 millimeters, 50 millimeters, 40 millimeters, 10 millimeters, they don't really experience handshake. But anything over 60 millimeters, like your 70 to 200, your 100, your 200 millimeter, your 300 millimeter, they all experience handshake because it amplifies all the handshake that happens when you're holding a heavy lens or holding a lens in general, because the lenses tend to be heavier. The more you zoom, the more shake amplification that your sensor will feel, all of the stuff. But now with Canon's 5 to 8 stops of image stabilization, with their new IBUS, they're saying that if I had a 100 millimeter lens, that I would no longer have to be at least 100 millimeters to absolve handshake from my image. Canon is saying that I could be at somewhere around 1 over 1.6 seconds at my shutter speed to actually absolve handshake. And that's just me dialing it down 5 stops. Because they said, oh, you got image stabilization up to 5, adding 5 stops of image stabilization. I'm like, okay, well, all right. In any normal situation, if I dial my shutter speed back from 1/100th of a second to 1/1.6th of a second, then I'll have that 5 stops of image stabilization handheld under relatively normal situation. This seems a little bit too good to be true. I got my my research there. The reason why I say this is a little bit too good to be true is because the term stop is not something that everybody uses in everyday photography. And the reason being is because the term or the unit of measurement stops for exposure value is not widely broadcasted on our cameras. Because since a lot of people don't know it, people don't say anything really about stops on the camera, because the large population doesn't really think about stops as units of exposure, or whether or not you're counting in 1/2 of a stop or 1/3 of a stop. Usually most cameras are counted in 1/3 stop increments. Since a lot of people don't think about stops as a unit of measurement for exposure value, Canon can probably get away with telling you 10 stops. So we're adding 10 stops with our new IBUS. But we have to really see that to believe that. So I'm waiting on Canon to bring out this camera, because I want to be one of the first ones to try it out, even though I'm not sponsored and nobody's going to send me one. Well, I hope somebody sends me one. Let's put it that way. All right, let's get on to the next specs. A mechanical 12 frames a second. I don't doubt that Canon can do this. The only thing that I doubt about this 12 frames a second is the amount of images this camera can process at 45 megapixels. So you think about it in this regard. You have the 1DX Mark III with a mechanical shutter that can shoot somewhere around 16, 18, some crazy amount of frames per second, but it's at 20 megapixels. The buffer is not going to be that bad on that camera, if even existent on that camera, because you're shooting such a small type of file, such a small size file. And most of it is going to be catered to JPEGs or HEF files, or even if it's RAW, it still has a nice buffer on it because that's what it's designed to be. But this new mirrorless camera, you have to think about all the aspects of mirrorless. Yes, Canon's gonna put a new Digic 10 processor in, or Digic X processor, whatever they want to call it. But even if Canon puts that new processor in there, does that mean that processor can handle the EVF, the IEVF, you see what I'm saying, the live view screen, and processing all that stuff, and then trucking all that information out to you at 12 frames a second and 45 megapixels? You already see how Sony's having trouble with their 60 megapixel A7R4. It will bounce back at you and say busy, busy, busy. The worst, the worst screen you can get from a camera nowadays, especially if you're a sports photographer, is your buffer being too busy for you to take the next shot. Then you miss a shot, not because you don't know how to take the shot, not because you don't know how to expose it. It's just because your camera's buffer is full. That's one of the worst feelings, that you're not able to control whether or not you're able to take a picture. All right, so the scroll wheel thing, there's no touch, but it's now a scroll wheel so you can get across. This is a big deal for people who are trying to change these new autofocus points. They haven't told you how many autofocus points it's going to be, but it's probably going to be in the hundreds of autofocus points. And there's no way you can just scroll all the way across the screen, especially if you're using a single auto point, to have the quickest autofocus. You have to be able to get to that autofocus point in a timely fashion. So I think this is going to be better, because a lot of people didn't like the mystery wheel that was on the EOS R. So I think that's going to be for the better, and I have no reason to think that Canon won't offer that. All right, so now live view toggle switch. I believe this is that thing from the EOS R where you can actually live view and use the live view screen as a switch. Don't quote me on that. If you've used the EOS R, let me know in the comments below whether or not that live view toggle switch is according to the autofocus points and your ability to change autofocus points with the live view screen while you're shooting. A bigger battery, I see no reason why not. Canon has always made bigger batteries for cameras that really push the envelope, because you're gonna have to be able to truck that many files, and you're gonna need the juice. You're going to need the juice to be able to truck 12 frames a second and 20 frames a second in live view. So I don't doubt that Canon's gonna bring that. They're definitely gonna bring that. 8K video. And 8K video has a lot to do with the battery life too. So 8K video, but it's not telling us how many frames a second. Obviously, Canon's not going to be able to hack 8K video. There's probably going to be some type of motion lapse 8K, or some kind of no audio 8K at a slower frames per second than 24, or something like some kind of, or a cropped 8K. Definitely, because think about it. I did some math on this and I was like, 8K is only 33.2 megapixels. And since 8K is only 33.2 megapixels and the camera is 45 megapixels, well, they're going to have to either downscale it or do some kind of pixel bending to get that 45 megapixels down to 33.2 megapixels. But then I did some more research and I said, well, you know what? How many megapixels does it take for you to make a Super 35 sensor worth of pixels, or make a Super 35 resolution? And when I did my research, I found out that it only takes you about 32 megapixels to make a Super 35 resolution of 8K. So they might be cropping it to Super 35, which is an amazing thing that they could do if they're coming out with 8K video, even if it's stifled, even if it takes a whole bunch of memory up. If they offer it and they do what they say they're gonna do, that's a lot of credit to Canon. But if they're able to crop it to Super 35 and just give us a max Super 35, and the camera operates as good as the advertisements is gonna probably say it does, then that's even a plus for Canon. So even if they crop the 8K, because 8K is not, it's not mainstay, it's not standard yet. But even if they crop it to a Super 35, Canon does get a lot of credit for doing something that they said they were going to do, because they haven't, these are leak specs now, but they haven't actually told us exactly how many frames per second that 8K is. All right, but I think that Canon's going to try to do 8K in some sense, form, or fashion, even though it may not be the 8K straight up start filming in 8K once you get the camera and the cards to go with it. I don't think it's going to be that. It's going to be something like, okay, no audio for 8K, or there's going to be for 8K video, but it's going to be a time lapse kind of thing. So 4K at 120. I think this is going to happen. And the reason I think this is going to happen is because they have new card slots that can handle 4K at 120. But another thing about 4K is that 4K has been at 60 frames per second in a lot of camera bodies for a long time. And so since 4K has been in camera bodies at 60 frames a second for quite a long time, Canon wants to be that new jump into the 4K slow motion fan base. And I think if they do it right, like I think they will, because Canon has been taking a long time with this camera. We've been waiting for it to come out for a long time, that they're really going to make a splash in this Sony versus Canon debate. So I think they're going to make the 4K at 120, and they're going to have these new CF Express cards that really help out things. They've already put it in the 1DX Mark III, so I don't see any reason why they don't have it in this new EOS R5. And then the last spec that I want to talk about is the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. And I was doing some research, and I found out that, 5 gigahertz amounts to about 160 megabytes per second. And you probably will see an uptick about how many people who are posting straight from camera to Instagram, Facebook, or going straight to the cloud, or going straight to Dropbox, or going straight. It's going to make working with a camera so much easier and so much fun. I'm done with CenturyFX Studios, guys. I think that Canon can actually deliver on a lot of this stuff, but it's an extremely, extremely exciting time for Canon right now. The Olympics is coming up. 1DX Mark III just came out. It's February. It's going to really, really launch. But you have so many things to think about with Canon, and I've been shooting with Canon for years. And if you have a lens base with Canon, you have a lot of exciting things to come with. And then on top of that, with the EOS R5, the EOS R6, maybe even a 5DX coming out, and also the 1DX Mark III, right on the tail ends of January going into February, all the other cameras below it, prices are going to come way down. So I'm done with CenturyFX Studios, guys, and thanks for watching the video.